Hello, fellow gamers. Back again with ranged combat. We'll talk about that. Go over some of the considerations like aiming, some of the situational modifiers. Then we'll go into loading, hit locations, damage and wound levels, heroic blast actions, and then we're going to talk a little bit about rabble and underlings, which I recommend. Some people don't like to use. I don't know why. What their reasoning is, right? I've never got any responses from that as to why they don't like them. They just say they just don't like them. So, and that's okay. Maybe they don't really understand why they don't like them, and that's all right too. That's okay. Eventually, I'll figure it out or not. One of the two. Range combat incorporates all forms of weaponry, which require to be shot, thrown, or slung to strike their target. The ranged weapons a character can use are listed as part of their combat style, anything from throwing stones to firing a huge trebuchet. Ranged attacks are resolved in an identical way to close combat. However, ranged weapons can normally only be parried with shields. Okay, that's the only thing you can use to parry a missile is a shield. Those without must rely on natural cover or use evade to dive out of the line of fire. Thus, against lightly armored foes, ranged weapons can be formidable deterrents. Most definitely, ranged weapons are very dangerous, right, to your opponent or to you if they're fired at you. Each ranged weapon has a number of specific attributes which determine the effectiveness. The ones which have a key bearing on combat are as follows. Force. This is important to understand is some of these terms, right? So force, the ranged weapon equivalent of size, right? So if you look at the weapon categories and of the ranged weapons, they're kind of different from the actual weapons themselves, in a sense, right? So an arrow, right, will drop with a harder force than the actual arrow itself, right? So we got longbow has a force of H, but an impale size of S. So that's kind of important to note, right? Because remember when we looked at weapon sizes on the damage reduction table, all right, this thing is huge, right? It's H. And so let's say you've got a shield that's large, you're going to deflect all of it, right? That's pretty cool. But if you don't have anything, it's going to come right in and do all of its damage unless you got something. Let's see. If you have, I think all the shields are kind of up there too. Let's see. Where are the shields? I need a shield. All right. Melee weapons, range weapons. Shields. They start at medium. Right. A heater shield is large. Right. A buckler is medium. All right. So if you have a buckler, which is medium, going against a huge, you're not gonna be able to stop any of the damage. A large shield, like the heater, will only stop half the damage, right? Because this thing comes in with the force of huge. So that's kind of interesting to note, right? So the force of the ranged weapon, right, is important to consider when parrying damage. Okay, it's the equivalent of size. It measures the penetration power of the weapon or its ammunition to determine whether the bow overcomes the shield. Okay, the blow overcomes the shield. I said bow, but they mean blow, which is normally a arrow or a javelin of some sort. Damage modifier. Okay, this attribute shows whether or not the damage modifier of the attacker can be used to boost the ranged weapon's damage roll. In general, only bows and thrown weapons allow the use of the damage bonus. Okay, so if you have a damage bonus of plus 1d2, make sure you add it when you're using a bow. Okay, because it's every little bit counts. You'll see every little bit counts. Range, 3 numbers separated by dashes or slashes. representing the maximum close, effective, and long ranges of the weapon or its ammunition. Close range is the distance over which the choose location special effect may be used. If it's at effective range, it's too far, right? Provided the target is stationary or unaware of the impending attack. Okay, that's like if you catch somebody by surprise. Effective range has no significant modifiers. At long range, the weapon can still inflict harm, but the amount of damage is halved, and the force is reduced by a step. So, close and effective range are your bread and butter if you're doing ranged attacks, right? Let's say you got a javelin, and your effective range is going to be between close and effective range. Both of those ranges right there are the ones you want to keep track of when you're in combat. So you want to be able to move around, keep your mobility, right? If you're going to be extended, like beyond the first turn, right, or beyond the surprise turn, right, you want to be able to continuously move about and maintain your either close or your effective range. So this way, you get the maximum amount of damage and maximum amount of options when you go into combat and inflict damage. Okay. Reload. This is the time it takes to reload a weapon which fires ammunition. Now, I was looking at reload as like the number of rounds it takes you to reload a weapon. I was like, man, that's nuts. I wouldn't do that. I would never use a ranged weapon, right? But it's actually the number of turns in a round, right? Let's say you've got 3 action points, and this one has a load. Let's say a longbow has a load of 2. Okay. So you fire, and then you wait one turn, a second turn, and then you can fire again. So basically, with a longbow, if you have 3 actions, essentially you can only fire once per round. Does that make sense? I hope so. If not, like I said before, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below, or you can also go to Tap Talk Design Mechanism and ask your questions there. You'll get a quick answer. And everybody in the Mythras community generally is kind and gracious and normally willing to help and give correct answers, right? From the book, rules as written, and also their own experience with their own situation. So remember, your Mythras is your Mythras. Yours is not going to be the same as mine. I'm going with the rules as written. Sometimes, we can deviate from that, and that's okay. No one's going to tell you how to run your game, okay? And if they do, they're wrong, right? Situational modifiers. The table on the next page provides some situational modifiers specific to ranged weapons. By the way, we're on page 107, if I didn't mention it before. Where 2 or more situations are pertinent to the character, use the most severe. So you're not going to stack situational modifiers, okay? Try not to stack situational modifiers. It's hard enough, right? So when you stack them, you're actually, it's kind of like I would say it's almost adversarial in a sense that you can see, for yourself how small of a chance that it gets to be when you got Formidable and Herculean facing you. So, I mean, they're already embedded into the system. So just go ahead and use them as is. Ranged combat considerations. Whilst ranged combat appears to be extraordinarily potent, they do suffer a number of restrictions and special rules covering their use. Specific notes concerning ranged attacks are as follows. Aiming. By spending additional time aiming a ranged weapon, a character can potentially increase his chance to hit. Aiming requires an entire combat round steadying the weapon and waiting for the best opportunity to release. For example, withholding a bow shot for a momentary lull in the wind or until a target moves between 2 obstructions. By aiming, the character may reduce the difficulty of a situational modifier by 1 grade. Additional rounds spent aiming grant no further advantage, right? So it doesn't go the other way either. So you don't want to stack them negatively. You can't stack them positively either, okay? So here's some of the situational modifiers. Light wind, hard. Moderate wind, formidable. Strong wind, Herculean. All right, gale, storm, or worse, hopeless. Target is running, hard. That's a good one to remember. If you're a target and you're running, they have a hard difficulty, okay? Target is sprinting. Man, you're all out. Holland, but sprinting, now you are a formidable target. Okay, something to remember, right? When you've got targets facing you. All right. The target is obscured by mist or in partial darkness. It's hard. The target is obscured by thick smoke, fog, or is in darkness. That's formidable. Target is completely obscured, Herculean, blinded or loss of primary perceptive sense, hopeless. Target prone, formidable. Attacker is prone, Herculean. Okay, there's two asterisks, right? One is for the wind, and there's two double asterisks for attacker is prone, which is Herculean. Attackers on unstable ground, that makes it hard. Okay, the first asterisk for the wind is assumes the thrown weapon or ammunition is vulnerable to crosswinds and supersedes the normal penalty imposed by winds on physical skills. And then the double asterisk for attackers prone penalty can be negated if using a crossbow from a prepared position, right? You just crawled over the hill, you're prone because you're hiding out and you're waiting for that opportune moment, right? You delay for one round aiming, and the next round you get that bonus to hit. Okay, distance penalties. Distance penalties. The difficulty of hitting a target increases rapidly with the distance which separates it from the marksman. Distance is considered independent of a weapon's range, the latter being the performance characteristics of the weapon over set distances. Distance penalties can be offset by the size of the target being aimed at. Hitting a mammoth at 50 meters is far easier than hitting a human at the same range, or a rabbit. The table overleaf indicates the difficulty grade adjustment of hitting various size objects over incremental distances. These stack on top of other ranged combat situational modifiers. So this is where they stack situational modifiers. Okay. I personally don't use this because, well, most of the combats we are in are approximately 30 to 60 meters encounter distance, right? So you got 21 to 40 and you got 41 to 60. Most of our targets are in the size of 11 to 20, making them one step harder. Okay. So we add that to the normal range combat situational modifiers. Sometimes it can make it formidable. Sometimes it can make it impossible. Okay. I don't usually use this. I feel it's a little too much for me, but you can use it. Okay. It doesn't say optional, so it's really not optional. But you're not going to break the system by taking it out or leaving it in. Okay. It's entirely up to you. So distance penalties can be offset by the size of the target being aimed at or hitting the right table. Overleaf indicates the difficulty grade D stack. Right. The values assume an active target in an open field. They're shooting a static object at a known range, for example, a straw hut, during a competition. The game master may reduce the difficulty by a step or two. Whilst there are a few creatures which achieve such gargantuan scales, there are other objects which can reach sizes in the hundreds, such as buildings, fortifications, and troop formations. Right? You must consider this if you're going to fire fiery arrows onto a thatch roof quite a few meters away. Okay? On the battlefield, the near impossibility of striking a single man is replaced by the use of volley fire, saturating an area densely packed with men in the hope that a small proportion of projectiles will strike home. For characters with a more destructive bent, statistics for siege engines are included in the economics and equipment chapter. Yeah, not going to get into siege engines. I don't ever use that, so you want to do that, we'll do that sometime later, but I'm only going to do that if someone requests siege engines, in which case we will use a whole different book. Okay, shield walls, and that's a good one. Okay, so firing into a crowd. Firing into the swirling ebb and flow of a melee can be a risky business even for the most proficient marksman. The unpredictable movement of crowds and engaged opponents can easily result in into the line of fire. during the time it takes for a ranged weapon to travel the intervening distance to its intended target. Right? So basically what they're excuse me. People are moving around, and it's hard to predict where they're going to be at any 1 second because of the scuffling around. Thus, there's always a risk of accidentally striking someone other than the original target being aimed at. It makes sense. When firing at a specific target at the edge of a crowd or melee, the attack suffers a difficulty grade of at least hard. If trying to fire through a group to hit the target in the midst or on the other side, the penalties should be raised to formidable. Wow, you thread the needle there, huh? The result, well, if you pull it off, that'd be great. If you don't, someone's gonna be mad if you hit them. The result of the dice roll is very important. A marksman who passes his attack roll, despite the difficulty penalty, has aimed true and will hit his intended target. If, however, the marksman fails a roll, but would have succeeded if not for the firing into a crowd penalty, then an adjacent victim is struck instead. If more than one target is in line of fire, the games master should determine the victim randomly, no matter who eventually becomes the target, intended or not. If they are aware of the impending attack, they are free to evade or parry as normal. Any special effects won as part of the attack only apply to the original target, not any accidentally struck bystander. Okay. I think you get that, right? If you hit your target, that's great. If not, if you didn't hit your target, right, because you need a formidable or a hard, right, then maybe firing at somebody else, right, you may be firing at somebody else by accident, right, so that person has a chance to parry or evade, right, so you have to leave the dice alone. Again, leave the dice alone until it's over. Okay, don't pick them up until it's over, right, or have the games master write the number down, right, if you really, really, really need to have those dice in your hand, okay? Firing on the move. A character is still permitted to use ranged weapons even while mounted on an animal or vehicle. However, in these circumstances, their combat skill is capped by the ride or drive skill of the person controlling the conveyance, which may or may not be the attacker himself. For example, an archer riding in a two-man chariot would have his attack skill capped by the drive skill of his driver. Okay, ranged attacks cannot usually be performed if the attacker himself is moving at a gait faster than a walk, since their aim is constantly thrown off by the physical movement. One exception to this are warriors trained in a combat style specializing in skirmishing. However, in this case, the attacker's attack percentage cannot exceed his athletic skill, right? So having a high athletic skill and using your skirmish trait, right? Page 86, I think. Me not knowing. 89. So skirmishing, the style permits launching ranged attacks while at a run, but not sprinting. Okay, imagine your warrior, warrior-S, or person character running around with javelins, throwing them at the enemy. At a run. Remember, as a target, if you're running, you are now a hard target, right? Not standard difficulty, but now hard difficulty. And you can toss these javelins all day long while at run speed, right? As long as your constitution holds up, okay? Because that's about fatigue, right? You have to talk about that, right? Fatigue is important when it comes to running around. Because you know you're eventually going to get tired, right? The other thing is, we'll talk about loaded weapons here in just a second. We're almost there. Impaling ranged attacks, right? Ranged weapon projectiles which result in an impale, such as an arrow or thrown javelin, clearly cannot be yanked free of the wound on the next turn by the marksman who threw or fired the weapon. However, nothing stops a character in close combat with the transfixed victim from subsequently attempting to grab the impaling weapon to tear it free. Note that the size of an impaled weapon is different from the force it's struck with. Ranged impaling weapons have a special column denoting their actual size when considering the hindrances caused by the impale special effect. The impale special effect is extremely useful because you roll damage twice and you pick the one you want. Remember that. You want to use impale. Boom. Okay, there you go. Impale. Roll damage again, pick the one you want. People usually choose the maximum amount of damage, right? All right. Before a ranged weapon can be used, it must either be readied or loaded. Okay? Grab a javelin That's ready, right? Remember, it takes an action point to ready a weapon, okay, to draw a weapon. So to ready a javelin for throwing, you must ready the weapon. That is an action point, okay? You can't throw it. You can't throw a javelin every single action point. You have to ready, take an action point for that. Then when you throw it, that's an action point, okay? And then ready, that's an action point. And then throw it, that's another action point, okay? So remember that. This can often take significant time, slowing down a ranged combatant's rate of fire. Throwing weapons, for example, javelins, necessitate the weapon be drawn or plucked up in preparation. This normally only requires one turn to complete as per the ready weapon action, providing it is within reach. If a second throwing weapon is held in preparation in offhand, the caster can swap it over to his throwing hand as a free action. Okay, so one in each hand, boom, boom, and then ready weapon. That's a good combo right there. Okay, excellent combo. It says right there you can switch your weapon to your throwing hand as a free weapon, as a free action. Right, javelin in this hand, javelin in that hand. Okay, since I'm right-handed, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this one. Chunk. All right, next action. Chunk. All right, and I might spend the next action drawing two more. Right, I might draw two more out of a quiver of javelins. Right. Okay. Projectile weapons such as slings or bows must be loaded. The number of turns it takes to load a ranged weapon is listed in its load column on the ranged weapon tables. A character can reduce the time spent loading or readying by use of the rapid reload special effect. That's a cool special effect if you're a marksman, right? You reduce that load time, lets you fire more projectiles, right, quicker. All right, so a word about reload times. A lot of people have discussed reload times, and we've all come up with basically the same idea. They're not very far off, if they're off at all, right? Some people think that they're right on the money. Some people say that they're a little bit off, but not that far off to be unrealistic. Okay, so if it takes 3 turns, it takes 3 turns. If it takes 2 turns, it takes 2 turns. All right, so just trust the system, and everything will be okay. Now, if you don't want to do reload times, that's fine. That's up to you. Like I said, you're not going to break the system, but it will make it more deadly. I will tell you that. If people can constantly fire their weapons, then that means the monsters can fire their weapons as well, in the same manner. So, tit for tat, right? Okay. Hit locations. Most successful weapon attacks land on specific hit locations. This can be determined randomly, or in some circumstances be selected by special effects such as choose location, to the head, right? To the head. A lot of people try to choose that location all the time. That's fine. You can keep choosing that hit location. All right. Boxers choose the head a lot, right? To randomly calculate which location has been hit, roll 1d10, 20, and compare the number rolled with the relevant humanoid or creature hit location table. Right? Animals and monsters have different hit location tables, and you'll see it, right? So, like if we go to an animal like this harpy right here has, right, its hit location. He's got right, left claw, abdomen, chest, right wing, left wing, head. We got, let's see, the horse, right? It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hit locations. The Parry has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hit locations. You'll see. I mean, you get it, right? Like a Manticore, right? Manticore's gonna have different hit locations, right? Manticore's got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hit locations, right? So there's one provided for every monster, and if you don't, if you're like making up your own monsters and stuff, they got some non-human hit locations back here on page 277, right? So you can make up your own monsters, and there's some guidelines here to offer hit locations. You can figure that out. Okay, it's not that hard. All right. So animals and monsters usually have slightly different hit location tables than humanoids to reflect their own unique physiology. These are listed as part of each being's description in the creature chapter. The humanoid hit location table is repeated here for ease of reference, right? Ease of reference, right 1 to 3, right leg. Okay. 4 to 6, left leg. 7 to 9, abdomen. We all know that 10 to 12 right there is the chest. Okay, 13 to 15, right arm. 16 to 18, left arm. And 19 to 20 is the head. Okay, so note, some attacks, especially magic ones or those produced by particular monsters, may strike several hit locations simultaneously. Ouch. Individual hit locations may be armored, either from worn protection or the natural toughness of the creature's outer surface, like a lizard man. He's got like a 2, I think, in every location because of his thick, scaly skin. This is important when considering damage and wound levels below. Okay, damage and wound levels. There's not a whole lot to do about hit locations except for that. When you choose location, yes, you can choose a head every single time if you want to, right? It's up to you. Especially if the person's not wearing a helmet, that means they have no armor there. It goes straight to hit points, right? Armor is very important here. Okay. If an attack strikes successfully, it causes damage according to the damage rating for the weapon. A short sword, for instance, inflicts 1d6 damage. The roll damage for the weapon or attack is modified by certain conditions in the specific following order. Apply the damage modifier. This stuff goes in order, okay? I don't ever recall having to make sure we're doing the specific order, but I can imagine that there are certain circumstances where this might take effect, especially when you have magic involved, okay? The damage modifier for the character making the attack. Modify the damage from any weapon enhancing or reducing magic, right? So the modifier for your strength, for your character, and then any for magic, okay? If parried, reduce the damage appropriately as per the comparative weapon sizes. If the hit location is armored, reduce the damage by the armor points value, okay? Example, right? Let's say I do 6 hit points of damage, and I'm using a short sword, okay? And I have a 1d2, 1d2 damage modifier, and let's say I am using Blade Sharp, okay? Blade Sharp is a folk magic, often used, right? Let's go to Blade Sharp here. We are so close to the magic section. Okay, Blade Sharp is cast on an edge and piercing melee weapon. It increases the damage of a weapon by 1 dice step, and incidentally leaves the edge honed after the spell concludes. This spell is often used on tools such as logging axes, plows, and razors, thus making casting the spell on a dagger increases it to 1d6, whereas the same spell on a great axe would increase it to 2d8 plus 2. So I have a 1d6 for my short sword. It goes up to 1d8. Okay. So now I'm going to roll 1d8, and then I add the 1d2, right? So 1d8 plus 1d2. That's going to go, the damage modifier goes first, right? And then the magic, right? Since the magic is boosting the damage, right? We're going to just use 1d4 here. 1d2 is 1, 2 to 4 is 2. Okay, so I roll this d8 because the Blade Sharp boosted me up a step. All right, luckily I get an 8, but then d4 I get a 1 to 2, so plus 1. All right, so that's going to be 9 points of damage. All right, now I'm using a medium weapon. Let's say I'm going up against a lizard man with a scimitar. He also has a medium weapon, and let's say he fails to parry, right? In this instance, because we want to show damage, right? So he fails in this instance. So he's going to take these 9 points of damage, and we're going to have to roll. Right, the hit location is 1, so we're going to just say that's his leg. All right, so his right leg is going to take 9 points of damage. We rolled a 1 for hit location. All right, so let's say monster way back here with the coat, harpy, horse, lizard man. Here we go. Lizard man, Ophidian. Okay, we rolled a 1. That would be his tail. All right, so he takes 9 points of damage to the tail. Okay, so the damage reduction is going to be 3 because his armor is tough scales. Okay, so we reduce the damage by 3, and now he has 6 hit points left. Those last 6 hit points go straight to his hit points. Guess how many he has his tail? He has 6 hit points in his tail. So now he's down to 0 hit points in his tail. Okay, so we'll talk about wounds in just a second. So now we got that. If he's down to 0 hit points in his tail, he took 9 points of damage. 3 came off from the armor, right? Okay. If the damage inflicted by the attack is above 0, right, which this one was, then the hit location sustains that amount of damage, with the damage total being immediately removed from the location's hit point total, right? Note how many hit points the location has remaining. This one has 0, and the wound category that results. A minor wound. The hit location still has positive hit points. No, it does not. It's not a minor wound. This is a serious wound. Hit location is reduced to 0 hit points or below. Okay, so he got a serious wound. A major wound is the hit location reduced to a negative score equal to or greater than its starting hit points. So it had to be a negative 6 for it to be a major wound or greater. Okay. Use the following rules if a location receives a serious or major wound. Note that the wounds requiring endurance checks test them in an opposed roll against the value of the original attack roll. Okay, let's say the original attack roll, right, it's going to be 52. Yeah, say I got a 60 to hit, right? So the original roll is 52, all right? If this reflects the ability of highly skilled warriors to make more deadly strikes. Endurance rolls are not repeated unless the location is wounded again. Okay? So if you would have taken a minor wounds are cuts, scratches, bruises, or sprains. They hurt, they may bleed, but are not significant enough to slow down or hamper the victim. A serious wound. If a location is reduced to 0 hit points or below, the victim receives a serious wound. All right? The location is permanently scarred and the victim cannot attack or start to cast spells, but can still parry or evade for the rest of the next 1d3 turns. Okay, 1 turn for the next turn, due to being stunned or distracted by the pain of the wound. The character suffering a serious wound to a limb must immediately make an opposed test of his endurance versus the successful attack roll of his enemy. Okay, so he's got to make this endurance roll against a 52. All right. And he's got to not go over his endurance, right? What's the endurance of the lizard man? All right. The endurance of the lizard man is going to be 66. All right. So lizard man has an endurance of 66, and I just rolled an 06. Okay. An 06. Is it a crit roll? Yes, it is, right? Because 66 crit would be a 7. And it's rolled a 6. So he could crit. He crit successfully, right? So he successfully made his endurance roll. Had this been an 8, he would have failed this endurance opposed roll because I rolled a 52. He would have had to be 52. Okay. Character suffering a serious wound to a limb must immediately make an opposed test of his endurance versus a successful attack roll of his enemy. Failure results in the limb being rendered useless until the location is restored to positive hit points. If a leg, the victim drops prone. If an arm, he drops whatever he's holding, unless the object is strapped on. Okay, use common sense here. Character suffering a serious wound to the abdomen, chest, or head must immediately make an opposed test of his endurance versus a successful attack roll of his enemy. Failure results in unconsciousness for a number of minutes equal to the amount of damage sustained in the attack, causing the serious wound. In this case, if he had failed and I hit him in the head, he'd be out for 6 minutes. Okay? Because how many points did he sustain? He sustained 6. Okay. First aid or healing skills can be used to help an unconscious victim regain consciousness, but he will not be able to rejoin any combat until he's received further healing to the seriously wounded location. At the game master's discretion, even if the character remains functional, all tasks requiring use of that body location will suffer an ongoing penalty of 1 difficulty grade until the injury is reduced to a minor wound. Okay? So his tail is not going to be a problem. However, he could have failed an endurance roll, and that he can't use his tail anymore. Right? So if he's got a tail attack or whatever, or the game master may say that he uses his tail for balance in combat, and so therefore he's now off balance and will suffer a hard difficulty from all his tests in combat. So it's up to the game master, okay? But use your common sense. If a location is reduced to a negative score, equal to or greater than starting hit points, right? In this case, -6 or 7, right? Equal to or greater than. Okay, so equal to -6 or greater, right? In this case, for the Lizardman's tail, the character receives a major wound. The character is immediately incapacitated, unable to continue fighting. A limb is considered to be severed, right? In this case, a tail might be severed, okay? Transfixed, shattered, or ripped off by a major wound. A character dropped prone, physically incapacitated, must immediately make an opposed test of endurance versus a successful attack roll of his enemy. Failure results in unconsciousness from the agony, okay? If a severed, punctured, or ripped off location is not treated within a number of minutes equal to 5 times the healing rate, the character dies from blood loss and shock. Done. Okay? 3 times 5. Number of how many? Minutes. So you got about 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Usually 10 minutes. Okay, 10 to 15 minutes to live if you've taken a major wound and you fall unconscious. Alright. The victim of a major wound to the abdomen, chest, or head drops unconscious, totally incapacitated, must immediately make an opposed test of endurance versus a successful attack roll of his enemy. Failure results in an instant and gratuitous death, decapitated, chopped in half, impaled through the heart, torn apart, and so forth. If he survives and location is not treated within a number of combat rounds equal to twice his healing rate, he still dies from blood loss and shock. Since most major wounds require some form of surgery or major magic to heal, the sufferer will be very unlikely to recover from a major wound in time to rejoin combat. Depending on the available treatment, the wounded location will be potentially maimed, right, and most definitely scarred. Alright, heroic last actions. Okay, you don't want to take a major wound. You're almost certainly off your character for a while, as they will be healing for a long time. As long as someone has first aid to get you back to a place where it's safe. Heroic last action. In special cases, where key characters receive a major wound, the game master might allow a heroic last action, such as spitting out one last spell, attempting to cut down their slayer, crawling away to hide, or trying to tourniquet their own wound. They must have working limbs applicable to the action and burn a luck point. They get a single opportunity to attempt their action, then immediately collapse into unconsciousness and probably death. Right? Please allow everyone a heroic last action. Right? It makes for better drama. You know, you don't want to trip and fall on your own sword. And that's it. You're dead. That would not be good. Okay. So use your common sense. Try not to kill people off frivolously. Right? The story is more important. Remember that, right? And yes, people can die. It's okay. But just remember that death should mean something, right? It should have a play in the drama, right? It should be a key of the drama, not just he died, you know. That's it. Done. You're dead. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you don't want to do that, right? You want to give people a chance to participate in the game and, you know, have people talk about that heroic last stand. Okay. Optional rules, rabble and underlings. I like these rules, okay? Only use these optional rules when the characters are facing a ravening horde of inconsequential and expendable adversaries. Competent NPCs and major villains should be treated differently. The mainstay of some fantasy literature is the scene of heroes scything down hordes of faceless opponents, you know, like Conan standing atop a pile of bodies. You know, that's pretty cool when you can do that, right? So you game masters, you can allow your characters to do stuff like that by using these rules here. Okay. Be they enemy soldiers, fanatical cultists, or even ravening demi-humans. To portray such battles in Mythras can not only be time-consuming enterprises, but are also difficult to pull off satisfactorily, considering the ever-present risk of becoming outnumbered or rolling a fumble at the wrong time. Luck points can only help so far. A better way of modeling these types of encounters is to provide weaker foes or simplify the bookkeeping required to keep track of injuries. Mythras offers alternate options to dealing with this issue, thus speeding up combat considerably. Rabble are foes who intimidate by their numbers, but in actuality have little prowess or willingness to remain in combat once blood is shed. They can take many forms, from vicious beggars who set upon drunken characters even when they stumble home from the tavern along dark alleyways, or the mindless adherents of a dark cult, eager yet incompetent. In terms of conflict, members of a rabble use the following guidelines. They have little or no armor, usually no armor. Okay, they're too incompetent to be able to use special effects. They don't have any special effects. They have hit points equal to 1/5 of con and size of an average member of that race. So you're talking about 10. So they got maybe 5 hit points. All right, maybe less. So con plus size, 5 plus 5. Let's say 10 and 10 is 20. Right, 1/5 of that is 4. So 4 hit points. Right, for like an average human cultist with no armor, about 4 hit points. Okay. If once they receive any damage, they cease fighting. Okay. If the damage is less than their hit points, they flee, cursing or yelling in fear. If the damage equals or surpasses their hit points, they collapse, clutching the wounded location and weeping or screaming in agony. If the damage is double their hit points, right? In this case, 8 points, right? They die in a spectacular and grotesque manner. That's up to you. Arms and legs flying, vorpal sword, whatever. One third of their numbers are dead or wounded. The rest of the rabble break and take flight. Okay, so you can literally take 15 goblins at they have a small size of, let's say, 8, right? And let's say their con is like 10, so that's 18 divided by 5. That's 3 point something. You can give them 3 hit points if you want to. It's up to you, right? And they're not wearing any armor, right? They just look mean. There's 15 of them. If 5 of them die, the other 10 will run away. That's it. Okay. Once 1/3 of their number are dead or wounded, the rest of the rabble break and take flight. So even if they take 1 hit point of damage, right, they run away, right? It's yelling in fear. So all they got to do is take damage, right? That's pretty good to use rabble in that sense, right? Because it gives the characters a chance to show off, right, and be heroic, right, and wade through a sea of enemies, right. That's a pretty cool story thing to have, story element to use, right. So I use rabble often, only because I think it's a lot easier to keep track of, and you're not trying to kill the characters. You just want to create this sense of how badass they are, right? And so that gives them some momentum, helps everyone have fun, right? And it keeps everybody in the game, keeps the game moving, right? That's a good thing, all right? Underlings are competent foes, usually sent en masse to harass adventurers, thuggish bodyguards, irregular troops in the opening stages of a battle, for example. Despite not being tracked as full characters, underlings can prove deadly if they catch their targets unprepared. Similar to rabble, underlings use the following guidelines. Underlings wear moderate amounts of armor, like leather armor, right? Underlings are freely able to use special effects. Underlings have hit points equal to 1/5 of the complex size of an average member of the race, so same number of hit points, right, as a rabble. However, they get special effects and armor if you want. But it has to be like light armor, right? Once they receive two injuries, right, they cease fighting. If possible, withdraw, cursing or yelling in fear. If the damage equals or surpasses their hit points, they automatically fail the endurance roll, suffering the effects of a serious wound in the location attack. Okay? Serious wound. Remember that, right? If the damage is double their hit points, they die in a gruesomely violent manner. Once half their number are dead or wounded, the rest of the underlings withdraw from the fight. Okay? That's it for the combat section. Yep. All right. I don't know what we can talk about next. Maybe magic. Maybe we'll cover that. Maybe we'll cover skills and how they're done. But I think or maybe I'll do an actual combat simulation on like Roll20 or something like that so you can see it. Other than that, hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that helps your understanding of the game in general and how combat works. and have fun gaming. All right. And God bless you all. See you all later. Have a good time.